Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome to another Psy-Changeling recap video. Today I am going to be talking about Wolf Rain, which is the third book in the Psy-Trinity series and the 18th book overall in the Psy-Changeling world. As with all these recap videos, this is probably going to be a long one, so get yourself a drink, get comfy. We're going to talk about this book, which I absolutely adored on reread. This is another one that's going onto my yearly rereads pile because I just loved it that much. If you are unfamiliar with the Psy-Changeling series, it is a paranormal romance series that reads very much like urban fantasy in a world that is like ours, but set in the future with three races who don't always get along. You have humans, changelings, and the Psy. By now, we are well and truly deep in this world. There's only one other published book and one that's coming out after this one, so spoilers abound. I'm not going to hold the book up for the whole time because it's just going to get really heavy, but I will put a picture of it on the screen. I'm going to preface this video with the content warnings for this book. If I miss anything, that's purely just me missing something. And I even had to be reminded of the major trigger warning for this book because it wasn't a major trigger for me. There is the death of a pet, and this happens right at the start of the book. We don't actually see it happen. We meet the character as just after the pet has died. But if that is something that will affect you, be aware of it going into the book. There is a lot to do with grief. We deal with the death of parents and siblings, kidnapping, torture, violence, revenge. This book features a couple of psychopaths in the story. So if that makes you at all uncomfortable, be aware of that going into it. It also talks about the execution of a character, and only very briefly, and that is to do with how the changeling packs work. And I'm going to talk about that at the start of the video because that is something that underpins the entire story. Wolf Rain is about Alexei Vasilev-Hart, who is a snow dancer lieutenant. So he's a wolf changeling. He's fairly high up in the hierarchy to the point where Hawk, who is the snow dancer alpha, and Riley, who is his second, are considering asking Alexei to step into some of Riley's roles because Riley and his mate Mercy have just recently had triplets and he wants to spend more time with his kids, obviously. And Alexei is their first pick for stepping in to fill in some of those roles. So we know that he's fairly high up there. He's very well respected. He is about 8 years younger than Hawk, so they grew up together and they went through everything that happened with the Snow Dancer pack way back when. So I talk about that more in the Kiss of Snow video, or the history in the Snow Dancer pack, but be aware of that background going into this book. The heroine of this story is Memory Avon Rose, who is a Psy. At the beginning of the book, she doesn't truly understand exactly what her Psy abilities are. Everyone keeps telling her in this book that she is an E-Psy, which is one of the empaths, but she doesn't believe that because her powers act very differently to the other empaths that we've met so far in the story. Nevertheless, we find out that she is an E-Psy. Her sub-designation is E-Sigma, which is a very rare type of Psy power, and we find out exactly what that means in the story, and I'll talk about that in the overview. But it does give her a very unique ability, and initially she thinks it only works in one particular way when in fact her powers are designed for a very specific use, and then the way that she has been using them initially in the story is sort of a side effect of her true ability, but she just doesn't know it because she hasn't had the opportunity to explore it or anyone to talk to her about it. So we know that she is a 9 or above E-Sigma, and she also has a minor telekinetic ability. I think she ends up being 1.5 on the telekinetic gradient scale. She is also a captive at the beginning of this book, and she has been for about 15 years. She was taken when she was a child. Her mother was murdered in front of her. She was taken by the man who killed her mother, and then he used her powers to further himself. So when we meet her at the start of the book, she's had a very traumatic life experience, and it's heartbreaking because she's such a fantastic, strong female character, and her experiences have really given her a warped view of herself. Okay, before I dive into the overview, the last thing that I want to mention is that each of the chapters are preceded by little excerpts from documents in the Psy-Changeling world. So these are fictional things like magazines and books and research papers and whatnot. So there are some fairly significant ones in this book. There are continued extracts from Alice Eldridge's manuscript on the E-Psy, which Sasha obtained a copy of very early on in the series. And Alice Eldridge was the only person researching the E-Psy before Silence, and she had started looking into the E-Sigma designation, but even the E's didn't talk about it because no one really knew what it was and no one really knew what their purpose was. So that's the hint we get from the very start of the book, that we're going to be dealing with someone who is a very different kind of empath. We also get plenty of excerpts from Wild Woman magazine, which is my favorite thing ever, which is this fictional women's magazine that deals with dating advice when dating changelings. And we get excerpts the whole way through, and it's mostly dealing with wolves and dominant changeling shifters and their mating habits, because obviously it is the relationship between a changeling wolf and a Psy, and it is just hilarious. I love every excerpt. I wish this was an actual series magazine that you could pick up because it's just so fun. There are also extracts from a research project being done into changeling rogues, and changeling rogues are changelings who become more animal than human, and they turn on their loved ones, quite often killing them, and they have to be killed by their pack mates because they're too dangerous. They'll kill anything in their path, essentially. And that is important because we find out at the start of this story that Alexi's older brother Brody went rogue and had to be killed, which leads me into the book overview, which the book opens on the anniversary of Brody's death. So Alexi is back in Snowdancer territory. He has his own den closer to the Oregon border. All of the lieutenants are rotated in and out of Snowdancer territory and spend a couple of weeks every now and then at the den so that they're close to their family and to the pack and to Hawk. It's quite obvious that Alexi has been scheduled to come back to the den on the anniversary of his brother's death. So Brody went rogue and killed his mate Etta, and this whole event has shattered Alexi because he was so close to his brother. They lost their parents when they were quite young. They were raised by their aunt and the rest of the pack, but they were closer than close. They were the best of friends, and the fact that his brother, his father, and his grandfather went rogue weighs really heavily on Alexi, and he believes really that it's only a matter of time before that happens to him. And so over the last year, he has become quite a different person. Where he used to be quite fun and easygoing, he's become much more introverted and relatively grumpy and has avoided most skin privileges or skin contact. So everyone is keeping an eye on him because they've noticed the difference. We find out a little bit later on that it was Alexi who found out first that Brody had gone rogue, had found Etta just before she died, and he couldn't bring himself to kill his brother, and so Hawk ended up being the one to execute Brody. So even Hawk is aware that Alexi might have complex feelings around his relationship with Hawk as well as a result. So that's a lot of the dynamic stuff that's happening because it does play a huge big part in this story. But the book opens with Alexi as he's patrolling a remote part of Snowdancer territory that not many wolves go to because something really tragic happened there in the past, and it gives a lot of the wolves the creeps, including Hawk. On the anniversary of his brother's death, Alexi doesn't really want to be around people, so he's patrolling in that area. And as he's out there, he is suddenly hit by an overwhelming sense of grief. And he recognizes that it has to have come from an E because they're the only people who can push out that much emotion to affect anyone in their vicinity. But the strange thing is they're in Snowdancer territory, there are no E's nearby. And so he ends up trying to track down the source of this emotion. And he ends up finding this very hidden cave that also has a trapdoor built into it. That trapdoor leads to an underground cavern cage setup where he finds a woman, and this woman is holding a cat who has died, and she is just beside herself with grief. He recognizes that she's obviously a captive, notes that the location is probably somewhere only a teleporter could access, and so he works quickly to scan the cave for any threats, and then gets her out of there with her pet as soon as possible because he doesn't know when this teleporter is going to come back. He was heading up to one of Snowdancer's hydro stations, and so he decides to take her with him. Outside it's raining and she only has very thin clothing on, so he gives her a jacket and walks her through the Snowdancer territory, and along the way they stop to bury her pet, who we find out the cat's name is Jitterbug, and was quite old, so it died of old age. It was natural causes, nothing untoward happened to it, but this woman is still very grief-stricken, and so she doesn't talk very much. But eventually they end up at this hydro station and she freaks out, and Alexi realizes it's because he's trying to take her inside and she's been trapped for who knows how long. He recognizes that it has to have been a long time for a couple of reasons. The fact that while she has clothes, there were smaller fitting clothes that looked like they'd been well worn, and also that the cat had died of natural causes but was quite old and had a very young name. So he's beginning to put the picture together that this woman has been in captivity for a long time. So when she freaks out about going inside, he gives her access so that she can open and close the door. She can come and go as she pleases, and then eventually challenges her to come inside. Because despite the fact that she's grief-stricken and despite the fact that she's been a captive, she responds better to a challenge than than she does to kindness. And at this point in time, Alexei is kind of short on patience anyway. So he just keeps pushing until she realizes what she needs, and then she eventually comes inside. And that's the really cool thing in this story. Memory stands up to Alexei the whole way through the book. She is well and truly his equal. Alexei and his inner wolf like that she's not a pushover. She might have been in captivity, but the wolf and Alexei never see her as a victim, if that makes sense. Alexei recognizes that she's an E, but that she smells very different to an E, and that there's a darkness to her psychic smell, which all the changelings talk about how the Psy have this metallic smell. So it's quite recognizable who's who. And it's in this initial scene where they first arrive at the hydro station that she eventually tells him her name, and that her name is Memory. We switch then to a scene with Caleb and Sahara, and they're talking about the projected fall of the Psy-Net. They seem to have stabilized it for now, but Caleb projects that in about 12 months' time it will probably collapse entirely, and that they've got that amount of time to figure out how to save it. Of course, he's still thinking that he can just cut Sahara out of it and a few other people and they'll be fine, but she wants him to help save it for everyone, so he's still working on that. The other thing to note is that the Net and the Dark Mind are losing coherence, and they are the sentient representation of the Psy-Net that constantly talk to Caleb. And he also senses a very strong psychic presence that has re-emerged into the Net, and he doesn't know who it is, because at first Sahara suggests that it could be a child who's been born with very strong psychic abilities, but he tells her that no, it's actually an adult. By this point, Alexei's contacted Snow Dancer, and so they're trying to find out any information that they can on Memory. And while they're waiting at the hydro station, he wants to know about the person who was holding Memory. And so eventually she tells him about Renault, who is a psychopath who likes to strangle women to the point of death and then bring them back to life and then do it again. And he did this to her mother. We know that he's a teleport-capable telekinetic who is, I think, about 8.7 on the gradient scale, and that he liked using Memory for her powers. At this point, Alexei keeps calling Memory an E-Psy, and she doesn't understand that because she doesn't believe that that's what she is. She's been told her whole life by Renault that, you know, she's a monster just like him. She's a nightmare. We then get a short scene with Renault, who has just figured out that Memory is gone. He's gone to check the cave and she's not there. And the reason he couldn't check earlier was because he was in a meeting, and so he actually couldn't leave. He didn't think that anyone would ever be able to find her without him having time to go back, and he is not happy. Alexei begins to realize that Memory is very functional for someone who has been in captivity for 15 years, and that she has a strong awareness of the world around her, and we know as the readers that she had access to media and popular culture. She was just limited in her movements and in the Psy-Net. They end up staying overnight at the hydro station, and during the night Memory has a nightmare, and part of it is because Renault is hunting her on the Psy-Net. In order to protect her, Alexei contacts the Arrows and asks them to track Memory's psychic signature and to try and find this guy who's hunting her on the psychic plane. Memory is able to fight off Renault on her own, and she also senses the psychic presence of the Arrows, and she's quite frightened of that because she's been told her whole life that the Arrows would hunt someone like her. She does think she's the bad person. She thinks that her powers are really dark and can't be used for good. Hawk eventually arrives at the substation to meet with Alexei and Memory, and he shows Alexei a picture of Memory out in the world with Renault, and Alexei confronts Memory with it, and she reacts really badly to this picture because it shows them out in public and it looks like she's helping Renault. And of course, Alexei challenges whether or not she was truly a captive, because she's not acting like she was held in captivity with no contact with anyone for the longest time. And this picture makes them all question, you know, whether she's telling the truth or not. She responds really angrily and quite violently to this. Like, she's truly distraught that he would even ask that of her. And then Aiden confirms for both Hawk and Alexei that Memory's psychic signature is different to most of the other E's. While they're talking, Lucy, who is one of the Snow Dancer healers, asks Memory if she can check on her health, and so they do that. And Lucy's really great with Memory, and she's kind and is really offering an overture of friendship because she is concerned about this woman who doesn't have anyone. And there's a really gorgeous scene before Lucy leaves, because Lucy decides to run back to Pack Territory as a wolf, and that's the first time that Memory sees a changeling wolf, and she's just delighted to see that. The decision is made that Alexei can't take Memory back to Snow Dancer territory. It's just not safe. They don't know enough about her to do that, but they decide that she's going to go and stay in the Empath compound, which is on Snow Dancer Dark River territory. And along the way, Memory refers to herself as a psychopath whisperer, and that's part of the reason why Renault wants her, because he himself is a psychopath. And she also tells Alexei that the way that Renault controlled her in public was that he was partly controlling her mind, but that he kept threatening to take other young girls and do to them what he had done to her. And she stayed because she didn't want anyone else to experience that. The first time that Alexei offers skin privileges to Memory, it's to do with the fact that they both have this deep fascination with each other's hair. So Memory has dark curly hair, and Alexei's described as really blonde. He's teasing her because he kind of wants to touch her hair, and she keeps looking over at his. They don't do anything at this point, but the offer is there and on the table, which is significant because Alexei hasn't been offering skin privileges to anyone outside of sneak attacks from some of the pack submissives who don't really give him a choice and constantly find ways to hug him or whatever, which is what a changeling needs. They eventually get to the compound and Memory meets Sasha for the first time, and Sasha is planning on trying to help her figure out what she is. Memory tells her she's not an E, but Sasha tries to convince her that she is. She just has a different ability to what Sasha and some of the others have. Sasha wants Memory to demonstrate what it is that she does, and Memory says she can only demonstrate it with someone who has psychopathic tendencies. And so they decide to ask Amara, who we met many books ago, and Amara is the twin of Ashaya, and we've known this whole time that Amara has those same tendencies. She doesn't have any empathy. Amara, being a scientist, is very interested in this in her own way because she likes new things, and so she agrees. So Memory, Alexei, Sasha, Ashaya and Amara meet, and Memory demonstrates her powers, which basically she is able to go inside Amara's psyche. She feels like she's trapped inside it because Amara's mind is like a black hole to her and to most other Psy, and she really struggles to get free because it feels like Amara is feeding off of Memory. But eventually she's pulled out, and Amara is delighted by what's happened because what Memory's powers have actually allowed her to do is to intellectually understand emotion and feeling. Now everyone is quite amazed by this, but what Memory tries to impress upon them by asking Amara a series of questions is that it's not that she's given Amara emotions, she's given her the ability to understand them. And there's a really telling question where she asks Amara a question, and the response is essentially that she has given Amara a better way to fake emotion, which is potentially dangerous for someone who has those tendencies. The bonus of this being that Amara is not someone with murderous tendencies, usually. For a psychopath who does have murderous tendencies, the ability to fake emotion and to fit in and blend in more is a dangerous combination, and Memory is terrified that people would take advantage of that. So what she claims is that she makes psychopaths better monsters, and Amara doesn't help the situation because she basically wants to own Memory, because the effect that Memory has on people like this is that she's basically like a drug. They just want another hit because it's so different to anything that they experience otherwise. We find out that this has a short-term effect, and that Amara will probably have about 3 hours of being able to experience things and feel the emotions of those events, and that afterwards she'll remember the event but she won't remember the emotion of it. And so Ashai gets to spend a couple of hours with her sister, almost behaving normally. Memory thinks that she has done the worst thing possible because she's given false hope to someone. However, later on we find out that that's not quite the case. Sasha decides that what they really need to work on with Memory is her shielding, because she was struggling to pull herself out of Amara's mind on her own, and so they start Sasha's shield school, which I love, is the best name ever. Alexei eventually reveals that it is the anniversary of his brother's death and that he had been executed by the pack because he'd killed his mate and gone rogue. And as they're talking, they're having this moment, and Memory initiates their first kiss. Not quite sure what to deal with this given that everything else that's going on. Memory drops her off at her cabin in the E compound and then leaves. She wants him to stay, but he chooses not to, and so as he's leaving, she calls out across the compound for everyone to hear, the E's, the Arrows, and whichever changelings are around. She calls him a chicken, but it is brilliant. He almost stays because it's a challenge that he almost can't resist, but he eventually leaves. He goes for a run in his wolf form, and he's eventually found by Matthias, who is another of the Snowdancer lieutenants, and then Judd joins them, and we find out that the three of them are really good friends, and that Judd and Matthias are there to support him on this anniversary. At the same time, something or someone wakes up on the Psy-Net, and it's a really dark power. And for the longest time, we don't know who this character is. We just know that they're waking up and that the honeycomb in the Psy-Net, which is basically the shield of the E-Psy to stop the net from failing, is having a really negative impact on their ability to control their powers. Brenner eventually tracks down some of Renault's properties and also some recent transactions and gives that information to the group. And so an assault team is put together made up of Alexei Hawk, Judd, Matthias, and I think Sing Lu, and they try to track him down, and they legitimately just miss him. And what they discover in this location is his trophy room. So he has a dead body in a hidden room in the basement, and he also has these packets of hair. So what he does whenever he kills someone is he cuts their hair and he keeps a sample of it in a bag with their name and the date that they were killed, which is very creepy. Alexi's still avoiding Memory at this point, but he keeps dropping gifts at her cabin, and so he finds a sparkly pair of sneakers that he thinks that she'll love, and he leaves them for her, and she wears them everywhere after this. Memory then meets Jaya, who is another one of the empaths. Jaya is a medical empath. She's visiting because she wants to run some psychic drills with Memory, and at the same time Ashaya arrives, and Ashaya is there with things to help Memory do her hair, and she asks if she can do Memory's hair as a way to say thank you for the time that she got to spend with her sister. Memory is terrified that Ashaya would hate her for giving her something that she couldn't keep, but Ashaya is in fact just thrilled that she even got to spend that time with her sister behaving almost like a normal person, and this was the only way that she could think of to say thank you to Memory. So while Ashaya does Memory's hair, Jaya runs drills with her and finds out that Memory responds better to martial psychic drills like the arrows rather than the rest of the Psy. Later on, Alexi arrives and updates her on the attempts to track down Renault, and Memory makes another move on Alexi, who tells her she's not ready to handle him yet. Memory gets really frustrated because Alexi truly begins to avoid her now, and in this time she gets to know Sasha better. Sasha takes on this big sister role for Memory, and Memory also befriends one of the arrows, Yuri. While all this is happening, Alexi keeps dropping food off at the compound for her when she's not around. And she gets really frustrated by this because he won't show his face, but he'll leave food for her. And so she starts handing the food out to the other arrows and the other E's until he starts being very specific and starts labeling all of her food. And so none of the others will take it because, as we find out through little snippets in the Wild Woman magazine at the start of chapters, it's a courting ritual. And she gets so frustrated with this. At one point, she turns around to Riaz and tells him to give Alexi a message. And she says, tell him that he's a big wolfy chicken, which then becomes a running joke for the rest of the book because the rest of the Snow Dancer wolves hear about it, and so they start leaving rubber chickens in places for Alexi to find, and it is glorious. It is one of my favourite things in the whole book. It made me laugh so loud. I just love it. Memory continues her psychic training. She continues to work with Amara. They're testing the shields that Sasha has built, and eventually she's able to disengage Amara on her own thanks to the shields that she's built with Sasha. Alexi visits the compound and he's talking with Jaya about how Memory is fitting in, and he finds out that every time she works with Amara, when she comes back to the compound, the other E's find it really hard to be around her because her psychic scent or her psychic presence is tainted by working with Amara, so she feels wrong to them, and because they're empaths, they feel everything. It's to the point where like they're physically ill around her and they feel so terrible, but they can't actually spend time around her after her sessions with Amara. This is kind of heartbreaking for Alexi because he knows she needs people around her. He actually goes up to her at this point and he asks her to go for a walk, and she's really unhappy with him, but she desperately wants company, so they start to go for a walk. But as they go for a walk, she recognizes this really dark presence that has taken over the compound, and then they hear a gunshot, I think it is. Something is trying to take over the arrows to hurt the E's, and when they recognize this, Alexi tells them or orders the arrows to take themselves out because they're becoming the threat even though they don't want to. And the truly remarkable thing about the arrows is that everything inside them rebels against the idea of hurting an E. Once this presence takes them over, they fight it off and they actually injure themselves to take themselves out of the equation. So eventually all the arrows end up unconscious, and a lot of the E's are traumatized by what's happened because they've felt everything and they have no idea where this presence has come from. As a result of it though, Yuri ends up on life support and they don't think that he's going to recover, which is just devastating for Memory. And Abbott, who is Jaya's husband, has ended up in surgery, so obviously she's quite distraught by this as well. When Aiden arrives, Alexi and Jaya let him know what had happened. They have to pull the arrows out of the compound because they can't trust that this won't happen again. And the Snow Dancer wolves and Dark River leopards are put in charge of protecting the E's. We get another flash to this unknown psychic power, which is responsible for the attack on the arrows and the E's. And we find out that this person has a twin sister, Theodora. After all of this, Renault then kidnaps an 8-year-old empath called Vashti in order to trade her for Memory. And when Memory and the wolves go to Vashti's house, she's able to pick up this psychic trail that links her to Renaud, and so they're able to track him down to Chinatown where they find Vashti, but he escapes and teleports out just before that happens. When Memory visits Vashti in the hospital, Vashti is thankful for her, but her father kind of blames Memory for what happened, and she takes this personally, and she ends up leaving the hospital without telling anyone, which infuriates Alexei. He eventually finds her outside and they have their first kiss. They're in Chinatown, it's the middle of New Year's celebrations, and so rather than just taking her home, they almost have this date. It's to cheer her up, and they go and eat lots of food. Memory thinks that her race are absolutely crazy for giving up human food. They have a really great night. They eat all of this food. She goes and gets her ears pierced, which is the funniest scene ever because Alexei he's so protective of her, he can't even stand by while she's getting her ears pierced. And he freaks out the guy that's doing it to the point where Memory just says, just go and stand over there, go away. But this whole time we get a sense that Memory knows how to cope and deal with Alexei's overprotectiveness and his dominant nature. On the way back to the E-compound, they end up making out in the back of Alexei's car. It's actually a really gorgeous scene. It's a little bit steamy, but it's absolutely gorgeous, just the way that it happens and the way that Alexei is very respectful of Memory. Alexei sort of reveals his feelings for Memory, but also tells her that part of the reason why he believes his brother went rogue was because his brother had a mating bond and he doesn't trust himself to accept a mating bond with anyone. He can have feelings for someone, he can share skin privileges, but he's very reluctant to accept a mating bond with anyone, including Memory, because of this fear that he will go rogue and possibly be the cause of her death. The next day, Sasha visits and they're continuing to work on her shields. They've found a few back doors in the back of her mind that they've managed to close, but she wants Judd to check to see if there's anything hidden that she couldn't see. And so Judd and Alexei come over and Judd's able to find a couple of extra sort of back doors that Renaud had built into Memory's shields. And he also points out that she doesn't use her minor telekinetic ability very well. The point that he was trying to make to her is that you will never know when you need to use a skill, even if it's not something that's super strong. She's only like 1.5, so she can't move things significantly. But he tells her, you practice it because you'll never know when you need to use it. Memory then gets the chance to meet Lucas and Naya, who are Sasha's mate and child, and they're out in Chinatown, but then another attack from this dark Psy occurs and they get Naya to safety, and Sasha and some of the other empaths in town manage to subdue most people so that damage can't come to them. And Memory tries to track down this presence, this person who has to physically be in Chinatown for it to happen, and she ends up trying to track him down with Caleb. They have a hilarious telepathic conversation because Memory's thinking really loudly and Caleb just responds, and he is generally being Caleb. Memory has a brief moment where she talks to this person, and afterwards, and then the connection disappears, and then afterwards she realizes that this person has two faces. There is their public face, and then there is this side of them that just keeps resurfacing. That unknown Psy wakes up in Chinatown with no memory initially of what's happened, and then he slowly begins to remember what had happened and who he is and why he's even there. And he's there to meet with the snow dancers because they have a business deal, which if you remember back to Allegiance of Honor, Pax Marshall started dealing with the snow dancers, and suddenly a lot of the little hints that we've been getting throughout the book and in Allegiance of Honor start to come to head. Pax Marshall is the head of a family. He is a formidable power, and he's in San Francisco to meet with the snow dancers. So begin to suspect, okay, well maybe this is Pax. But he truly almost can't control this other side of him. The ruling coalition of the Psy meet, and Nikita has done some digging around some old council projects, and she uncovered Project Scarab, which was a program that was designed to help Psy who, under silence, began to lose some of their psychic abilities. So there were some Psy who actually lost power under silence. And Project Scarab was a program that was designed to adjust and modify silence so that they could still retain their true abilities while still being silent. And the project itself was a success until these people began to behave very erratically and have hallucinations and all sorts of things. And it wasn't that these people were the psychopaths of the Psy-Net. They were just regular people whose power levels began to drop. And when they tried to fix it, had unintended consequences. So the suggestion here is that obviously Pax was one of those people involved in that project. When Alexei ends up taking Memory home, he decides that they should play a game. And so he shifts into his changeling wolf form and gives her a head start to play a game of chase. And so she runs off into the woods and she comes across Matthias and Singlu, who both decide to help her throw Alexei off her scent. And they play this game. And eventually Alexei tracks her down and he's delighted that his packmates played with her and that she played with them, and that she played with him as well. And they end up having sex for the first time outside. At this point, Alexei recognizes the mating bond that he has with Memory, but he refuses to do anything about it. And he does later admit to Memory that they are in the mating dance, but he has already explained why he's so reluctant to accept it. We see that Renaud begins to completely unravel. He started taking drugs to get his high because he's lost the ability to use Memory for that. And when Memory and Alexei go to visit Jitterbug's grave and also to revisit where she was held captive because she needs that closure, Renaud teleports in and is able to kidnap Memory again. And he ends up holding her in this basement somewhere. Alexei tries to contact both Caleb and Basic to see if they can help find and track down Memory before Renaud does anything, but they're both involved in a Psy-Net collapse and he can't get in contact with them at this point in time. So he does the only thing that he can do to track her down without any other help, and that is accept the mating bond because it gives him a connection to her that he can trace and track. So he does the thing that he fears the most in order to save her. He also gets in contact with Judd and asks him to help because if he's going up against a teleporter, he wants someone else there who's going to be able to control that teleporter. While being held by Renaud, Memory is able to block his attempts to get into her mind and to access her powers, which infuriates him. And when he's out of the room, she uses that minor telekinetic ability that she's been practicing to escape her bindings. And when he comes back, she's still in the building, but she's not tied down and he can't find her. And so she begins to negotiate with him telepathically to hide her position in the room. And she starts using the things that she has learnt from working with Amara in her negotiation with him. And she treats it like, well, if you want to use my powers, then basically I'm a consultant and you'll pay me and you'll set me up this way. And it's all a distraction in order to buy time for Alexei to come and find her. She also feels that the mating bond has kicked into place and that she has this connection with Alexei, and when she knows that she's close, she's able to give him some kind of signal to let him know that she's going to cause this distraction. And at this point, Judd is able to teleport Alexei in and he's able to kill Renaud. After all of this and she's proven herself, Alexei and Memory eventually move into the den, and Hawk welcomes Memory then and treats her like she's part of the pack, which is really nice. And Memory continues to work with Amara because it's a way of training her brain, but it's also helping Amara in some small way, because there are reports that Amara is spontaneously displaying empathy at weird times to other people around her, like helping someone lift something and so on and so forth. We discover that Abbott has begun to recover, but Yuri is still on life support, and Memory desperately wants him to survive because he was her friend. And we find out that Pax is desperate to work with this midnight empath who should hopefully be able to stabilize his powers. Caleb and Sahara and Ivy Jane and Vasek also meet with Alexei and Memory, and they want her to talk to the Net and Dark Mind, because what they've noticed is that the Netmind is protecting both Silver and Memory's mating bonds from the rest of the Net. They're actually being physically hidden, even though everyone knows that those bonds exist. Most people can't see them on the Net, and they think that if Memory asks the Netmind, it will explain to her why. And Memory agrees, and when she goes on to the Psy-Net, she forgets to ask that question because the Netmind starts showing her other things, and it shows her cleaning a shower. And when she talks to the others about it, Alexei suggests, well, maybe your powers act as a bit of a filter, because we know that a lot of the psychic abilities in some way help the Psy-Net in general in some way. Memory decides to run an experiment, and she knows that there's something wrong in the Psy-Net, that she's been told that, and so she shows herself to the Netminds as holding cleaning products, and they take her to a part of the Net that is damaged, and so she spends time cleaning it. The actual visualization of it is really interesting. Eventually she's pulled out because she's exhausted. She's used all her mental and psychic reserves. And she says, oh, well, I only cleaned a tiny part of it. I don't know what impact it's going to have. And when Caleb goes to check the area of the Net that she's cleaned, she's actually cleaned an area that contains about 1,000 psychic minds, and that area is now safe and stable. They theorize that that's her true ability. The E-Sigmas were designed to help clean up the parts of the Net that got sick. And the offshoot of her powers is that it has a similar effect on people whose minds are, I don't want to say broken, but are different. And they realize that you know, this was the true power of the E-Sigma. And I think that's a really cool concept. We then begin to find out a little bit more about Pax. So Pax and his sister Theodora were twins, and generally amongst the Psy, the decision was made to keep twins together unless they started showing signs of harmonizing, at which point they needed to be separated, because when twin Psy harmonized, they basically increased each other's powers. Of the two of them, Pax actually has the highest gradient of power, and Theo has sort of been, by her family, been pushed to the side because she's a very low gradient Psy. Pax goes to the Arrows and admits that he's the one who has caused all of the problems and tells them he wants to fix it. Part of it's to save his life, but he also says he wants to try and help Yuri, and that he believes that he can do it. And in exchange, he would like to be able to talk to Memory and see if she can help him. And obviously they're very wary of making that deal because Memory's not there. But Pax says he wants to help Yuri first, and then they can decide whether or not to introduce him to Memory. Pax and his sister go to visit Yuri. They are able to basically repair his neural network. Pax is the conduit, he provides the power, and he actually boosts his sister's abilities so that she does the very intricate work of repairing Yuri, but Pax provides her with the power to do it. Afterwards, Memory agrees to meet with Pax, and similarly, he's able to use her powers to stabilize, and she suggests that he actually needs to use his sister as a measure when he'll need further help from Memory, and that Theo would be the best person to know when he needs that extra help because she's so closely linked to him. After all of this, Memory decides to take Alexei to visit Keely, who is the researcher looking into what causes changelings to go rogue. She does it because she doesn't think that Alexei is going to go rogue, but knows that he needs reassurance from someone who knows more about it than she does. And so Alexei sits with Keely and they talk through, and at the end she tells him that he doesn't have any of the markers that the changelings that go rogue do, and that it's highly unlikely that it's going to happen to him, which is a reassurance. And then one of the last scenes is that Memory's out with Lucy. They're watching the Snow Dancer pups in Pack territory, and Alexei arrives, and he's brought Memory a kitten, and this kitten is tiny, orange, and the runt of the litter, and she names it Beast, because of course she does. And then they sort of show off the kitten to the wolf pups, who are very intrigued, and that's sort of the end of the story. It's gorgeous, and I love the dynamic between the two characters because it's very, very even, and you guys know me, I love even dynamics between my couples in their relationships because they reinforce each other and they also fill the gaps that the others don't have. In terms of things for world building, we get more references to what happened to Snow Dancer when the pack went through everything that it went through when Hawk was 12. We find out that Alexei was raised by his aunt Clementine and that she did the best that she could to raise both Alexei and Brody. And Clementine is a Snow Dancer soldier. Alexei is on a 3-week secondment from his den. While he's at the home den, Indigo has taken over his duties there. I think I already talked about Hawk and Riley wanting Alexei to step up and take over some of Riley's duties. Matthias is courting Nell, who is one of the maternal dominants. Maternal dominants? Yeah, Nell's one of the maternal dominants. I think she was the one who Sierra was terrified of. We find out that Judd has been finding it easier and easier to teleport Snow Dancer wolves since he has become a Bloodsworn member and a lieutenant of the pack. So now he finds it easier to teleport them if he needs to. Keely Schaefer, who is the changeling who is running the research on changeling rogues, is Emmett's mother from Dark River. Jai becomes the new social interaction columnist for the Psynet Beacon, which is the Psynet's sort of news. So now they've got a social interaction columnist. Lara and Walker's pup is born and it's a boy. I don't think we hear the name in the book, but they have a boy. The thing about the Psy twins is really interesting that they have the potential to harmonize and to increase their powers and to work in interesting ways, which we had seen in, oh gosh, Hostage to Pleasure. No, not Hostage to Pleasure. It was Cartier's book, because Nor and Ashire's son, who I'm mentally blanking on his name, they worked together to heal Cartier's mind. Now, they weren't twins, but their powers worked together to do that, and that also happens. But with the Psy, they were very wary of it happening with twins because there was the possibility that they could become codependent and that silence wouldn't sit with them. The other interesting thing is that after Silver and Memory have mated to changelings, Caleb observes that their sections of the net are incredibly stable and that they're more stable than other areas. So that highlights not only the importance of Psy mating with or forming close relationships with humans, but also with the changelings, and the fact that the Psy net was never designed to just contain the Psy. Okay, and then finally my fun things, and there's a lot of them. There is mention that Caleb featured in the Sexy But Scary column in Wild Woman magazine, and that Sahara plans to frame it, which I wouldn't put it past her. There's also a really cute scene where Sahara and Caleb go to visit Bowen and Kaya in Venice. They see Hex in the window. Hex is Kaya's mouse, and Caleb teleports in mouse treats so that Sahara can give them to Hex. This book is full of nicknames. So Alexei calls Memory Lioness and Valkyrie throughout the book, which I love because they're all really strong nicknames. And then Alexei has the best names. So most people call him Lexi. If they want to get on his nerves, they call him Sexy Lexi. And then Memory calls him Mr. Wolfie, and then continues to call him a big wolfy chicken throughout the book, which is my favorite nickname of all because he is a big wolfy chicken. Throughout the book, a lot of the leopards refer to living in Snowdancer Den as living in a big puppy pile, which I think is a really cute description. I loved that throughout the book, Memory kept stealing Alexi's clothes and not giving them back. The rubber chickens that Alexei keeps finding around the den are hilarious to me. Throughout the book, Alexei is constantly growling at Memory, usually when she's pushing his buttons, and her response eventually is to just push pictures and feelings of puppies, rainbows and sparkles at him, which he resents because he's like, I'm a big bad wolf. Why are you sending me pictures of puppies? She's perfect for him. And then right at the very end of the book, there's this really gorgeous scene because we're with Snowdancer, so of course we need a Ben scene. And Ben is one of the juveniles, and in this book he's 7. So it's obviously been a couple of years because I think he was only like 4 the last time that we saw him. So Ben is 7, and there's this gorgeous scene where Memory and Alexei are outside. Alexei knows that Ben is there, and so eventually Ben pops his head up, and then up pops the head of his little sister Elodie, who's 2, and they're both in wolf pup form, and they play with Memory and Alexei. The wolves consent when Memory has been working with Amara as well because she doesn't smell right, and Ben changes back into human form, and he mentions this to Memory that she doesn't smell right, and she says it's because she's been working, and he goes, oh yes, that's like when I play in the mud and I don't smell very good. And so he's really accepting of it. And as they walk back into the den, he announces this to everyone. Memory smells bad because she's been working, but you need to be nice to her. He's her little defender, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I absolutely adore that scene. Plus Elodie being a tiny little 2-year-old wolf cub is just gorgeous. That is Wolf Rain. I had an absolutely delightful time reading this book. It was so much fun, and it's definitely going on my top lists for the Psy-Changeling books. I really loved it. All right, so that is it from me. Thank you very much for watching. If you would like to discuss the book with me, let me know in the comments or come and join us in the Discord group. Or if you'd like to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, leave your favorite food emoji in the description because Memory did love her food. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.